super mini IRAC. This is the Uzi 9mm, invented by a guy named Uriel Gal, I think. 9mm submachine gun. Over time, he kind of refined it. This is the mini Uzi, more in the category of machine pistol, and this is the super mini Uzi. So you can think of IRAC in these kinds of terms. This is already a relatively small handheld weapon. At the very beginning, we talked a lot about IRAC. And last week, in talking about mini IRAC in detail, I said that you always think IRAC, but you write mini IRAC for the most part. Mini IRAC, to be clear, is where there's no back and forth on most of the elements that are more easily resolved. You simply come to your conclusion on that. So for instance, for battery, intent is just resolved in a single line. You say that these facts show that there's intent, these facts show that there's battery, show that there's an offensive touching, etc. And that you keep a back and forth on the close issues. So for instance, as we discussed before in the Brazilian's pies hypo, the close issue that remained was consent. And so there was still a he said, she said format on that. There's a way to do mini IRAC in even briefer form, and I call it super mini IRAC. So in mini IRAC, which we discussed before, we still generally did an issue statement or a title, and we still set out the elements in the rule section, elements or factors of a given tort or doctrine. So when you're on super mini IRAC, these are the general rules that you follow, and I'll explain why you want to use this in a bit. One is that there's no statement of issue or recitation of the rule. Those basically get folded in here implicitly. So you start with your conclusion. Now, I generally say that that's not a great thing to do, but when you need to move quickly through an issue, especially if it's an easier one to resolve, there shouldn't be any hiding the ball. The real key is that you've done the mental work of a full IRAC yourself, that you haven't fallen into the habit of just jumping to conclusions, but that at least mentally you've done the work of a full IRAC, that you've wrestled with each of the elements so that you know why you came to the conclusion that you did. So this kind of skips the illusion that this skips showing that work to some extent. And you can still be tentative in your conclusion. You shouldn't be any more confident than you would be in doing a full IRAC on a conclusion. If it's a confident conclusion, you start with a confident conclusion. If it's the better view is, or the likelier scenario is that someone is liable for some tort, then you say it that way. The conclusion implies a statement of issue. In this sense, the issue was always repetitive because you're saying, did this person cause a tort? And you end with, yes, this person caused this tort. And by starting with the conclusion, you kind of skip that and you meld it into one thing. You don't recite the rule, but you do a very fast analysis of each of them. You still need to discuss facts pertinent to each element. So it is in correctly and fully doing that analysis that you are at least implicitly referring to the rule. So no statement of issue or rule, you start with the conclusion. Then you conclude on each of the elements that are relatively easy to analyze, as with the old mini IRAC while you're analyzing. And the analysis kind of looks like this. There's some analysis because, and then you state a conclusion, you put in a because, and you analyze the facts that cause you to come to that conclusion. So here you would say DHC, going back to the Brazilian pies hypo, intent DHC had the intent to commit battery because pies don't throw themselves. You might need to unpack that a little more, but you can kind of do that all in one line. And you still continue to do back and forth on close questions. Just because you're doing this super abbreviated format does not mean that you gloss over actual ambiguities or hard points. You still wrestle with those completely. So this is kind of what it looks like more fully with the Brazilian pies hypo, and you can go back to the last office hours to see how something was converted from full IRAC to mini IRAC. I didn't do a kind of line by line or red line to show you mini IRAC to super mini IRAC, but this is basically what it looks like. You start with the conclusion. DLC is likely liable to pH for battery. Here's you just jump to the analysis. DHC has intent because pies don't throw, had intent because pies don't throw themselves. Pie throwing is offensive. Notice that I'm bolding the actual element and showing you the because the factual analysis happens after the because. Pie throwing is offensive because it's not a hug, it's humiliating. There's no dispute that the pie touched plaintiff PH's face. If it's that clear, we just kind of skip the because, but it has to be very clear. More of you should err on saying a because, generally speaking. And here's the closed question consents absent. So we just start with the conclusion. It's okay to just start with that. This PH did not impliedly agree to a pie in the face. DLC could argue that the don't look sign warned PH off of looking into the hole. The sign was not specific about danger the way that a sign the front row of SeaWorld is or Blue Man Group. And you end up with a nice clean paragraph like this that closes out the full analysis. DHC is likely liable pH for battery. DHC had intent. Pie throwing is offensive. The pie touched pH. And then here's your closer issue. Any questions about super mini IRAC? Now, you want to use this. I went back and looked at other exams that I'd actually written and did well on. And super mini IRAC is something that I used in high transaction value. I'm just making up jargon here. In crim and torts hypos where they're just a ton of facts. You get a large page of facts and you have to blow through them as fast as you can. You want to use this kind of format. Even with contracts, you might only have, say, 2 parties, but this kind of format may be useful where you have a lot of discrete issues, different potential ways that one party could be contractually obligated to the other, or a lot of different defenses. You may also need to use this kind of a format.